Today, I want to talk to you about how I've seen behavioral science be applied to marketing. So specifically, I'm going to go through 7 different examples of how these nudges are applied to marketing. And then I'm going to go deep on an example that I think really stands out in the mind, and one that hopefully you should sort of take away and remember, and definitely one that I think about a lot. So let me share my screen. Awesome. Yeah, so today we're going to cover 7 behavioral science tools to turbocharge your marketing. I really do believe that behavioral science is the key to unlocking good marketing. I'll get into it in a bit, but I spent a lot of my career applying this stuff, testing how it works, and I've seen the difference. I've gone from being a marketer who really struggled to get stuff done to being a marketer that's able to get repeatable results time and time again by applying these principles. But first, who am I? That was a wonderful intro from Ryan, probably the best intro I've ever had, actually. So kudos to you, mate. That was awesome. And better than I usually introduce myself, which is funny. But I'm Phil. I host Nudge, and Nudge is the UK's top marketing podcast and one of the top 10 business podcasts in the UK. It's the biggest behavioral science show in the UK and one of the biggest in the world. There are 50,000 people that tune in each week, which is wonderful. And on that show, I speak to consumer psychologists and behavioral scientists who are really experts in their field. They have created studies which are peer-reviewed. They've written books which are on the New York Times bestseller list. And they really go into detail about how behavioral science works, how you can apply it to marketing, but also how it applies to your life. So I don't consider myself an expert, which might be a bit disappointing to some of you, thinking, why am I listening to him? But hopefully it should also show that any of you can really learn and understand these stuff by leaning into behavioral science. I'm also a senior product marketer at a company called Buffer that does social media scheduling. Wonderful company. And if you want to grow your following organically online without paying big bucks for paid ads, go and check out Buffer. But today we're going to go into behavior science, and I'm going to start with a bit of a controversial opinion. It's something that I don't often admit as a marketer, but I think that marketing can be sort of incredibly dull. As marketers, we are intensely focused on highlighting pure positivity, all the great things about our products, all the great things about our brand. And all too often that comes across as just purely superficial. Advertising campaigns, marketing slogans, product launches, they all tend to say the same things. They all tend to talk about how great, how wonderful, how fantastic a product is. You've got Gillette, who used to at least say the best a man can get. We are the best a man can get. You've got KFC saying our product is finger licking good. You've got Coca-Cola saying that you're opening happiness. And I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised about this bias towards positivity. If you want to get someone to do something, if you want to get someone to buy something, it makes sense to talk about how great that thing is. If you were trying to hook your roommate up with a friend of yours, if you're trying to put 2 people together and get them to go on a date, you wouldn't tell them about how that roommate microwaves his tuna in the office. You would say how that roommate is wonderful, how that roommate's fantastic, how he's funny. That's the sort of things you would do. You would focus on positives. This is conventional wisdom. Focus on positives to convince people. But is it right? Because I think deep down that most of us know that we are not drawn to solely positive things. Often we prefer darker things. We prefer negative things. And this isn't something which is just a gut instinct. This isn't an old wives' tale. There's some science to back this up, and it's called the negativity bias. It is the idea that we have a bias towards negativity, that negative things actually capture our attention, and negative things make us pay attention and can persuade us, often more so than positive things can. This is important, not just for marketers, but for politicians and for society at large. And you can see the negativity bias if you just open up probably Twitter, probably Facebook, probably Instagram, but definitely your news app. If you open your news app on your phone, you'll see it. News articles on a whole highlight negativity because we are more likely to read negative articles. Go onto YouTube and you'll see fail compilations that get millions of views, while success compilations don't really exist. One of my favorite examples for this, and excuse my language here, but it is an Instagram account called Shit London Guinness. So it shares pictures of the worst pints of Guinness that people have been served in London. You can see some of the awful offenders on screen here, and I do apologize for anyone Irish listening in that you've had to see this. Not a nice sight to see, some of these poorly poured pints of Guinness. This account, at the time of me taking a screenshot, which was a while back, has got over 150,000 followers on Instagram. That's a lot of people keen to see something a little bit negative. And if you compare that to Guinness's own UK account, you'll find that it has 10 times as many followers. So it's a specific example, but a classic example of how we are often drawn towards negativity. Yet, if you were Guinness and you suggested a marketing campaign that talked about your product's negatives, about your product's failures, about the bad things about your product, you would get laughed at and you would get told to leave the room. If you told McDonald's to change their slogan from "I'm loving it" to "I've only got £4, so this will have to do," you would get kicked out of the boardroom. But I think that this is marketing BS. It's marketing bullshit, because it is marketing based on what marketers think work. Marketers think we are drawn towards positivity, versus marketing that is actually based on fact, based on science, based on studies. And I think if we try and understand the people who are viewing our ads, try to understand why and how they make the decisions they do, you wouldn't laugh at this slogan from McDonald's. You'd probably embrace it and suggest it and see the wisdom behind it. So this is my big problem with marketing, that marketing in general is based on essentially gut decisions. Sure, we leverage data, sure, we run A/B tests, but a lot of the ideas that we come up with for campaigns or tactics, they don't come from a layer of science or a layer of laws. They come from really our gut instincts. And I sort of think that we're still in this madman era of sitting in a room, trying to be creative, coming up with the best thing we can come up with for our email header or our landing page or our product design. And rather than leveraging science, we leverage collective wisdom and groupthink to come up with our marketing work. But the thing is, if we start to apply science, we often find we'll get a lot better results. And I'll get into how that works in a bit. But first, a lot of the marketers listening in are probably thinking, what science? What do you mean apply science? What science can we apply? And the real eye-opener for me in my career is that there is a wealth of science that doesn't come from marketing, but it comes from the world of psychology. Because psychologists have spent hundreds of years understanding exactly how we make decisions, how we are influenced, how we persuade others. And they've identified hundreds of different biases which determine our decision-making process. These biases cover all sorts of things, from why we pick the products we pick, why we live in the area we live, why we choose the partner we settle down with. And if you start to understand these biases and learn the behavioral science that all of us live by, you'll be in a much better place to understand what marketing works. So let's dive into 7 different examples, starting with one that I'm sure all of you will know: social proof. Now, social proof is the idea that we follow the actions of others. This is evolutionary bias. So as we evolved, we gained this bias, and for good reason. If you saw a bunch of cavemen running out of a cave, and you're a caveman yourself, you're not going to go into that cave. You're going to run with them and leave the cave, and for good reason, because it's probably likely that there's something bad in the cave, maybe a bear, maybe a fire, who knows. But we follow the actions of others, and we do so because it's helped us evolve over time. And as with many of the decision-making heuristics and biases that we have, this has held true to today. Today, if you're walking down the street and you see a bunch of people looking into a shop window, you will look into that shop window as well. There's a wonderful example of this. You should, after this, YouTube elevator social proof study. And you'll see this example of these researchers who sort of took over an elevator, and they were about 3 of them in the elevator, and then they would let a random person walk into that elevator as well. And the researchers would all together on cue do something sort of a bit weird. So for example, they would all turn, and instead of facing the door, they would face the mirror. And the one person who wasn't part of the research group, who was a sort of participant, unknowing participant in this group, would always follow the actions of others. It's incredible how much we are influenced by others. In fact, there's another study which shows that if you get, I think, 10 sort of research Scrooges to say that one line is sort of bigger than another, even though it's not, you'll be able to convince an actual real person to go against their best judgments and say, oh yeah, that line which looks smaller is actually bigger. Anyway, getting into deep examples, let's give a marketing example for you to apply this. And one of my favorite examples of social proof applied in marketing comes from Richard Shotton's wonderful book, The Choice Factory. Now, Richard Shotton applies behavioral science to marketing in lots of different fields, and he decided to apply it in a London pub. And he went to the barman and he said to the barman, what is your best selling beer on tap? And the barman said, I think it was London Pride in this example. So a very popular London ale. And Richard Shotton said, look, I would love to run a test where we look at social proof. All I want to do for 1 week is put a sign on your London Pride beer and just tell people that that is the best selling beer. Just tell people that that is the beer that people are most likely to choose. The barman said, sure, like, whatever, you can try it out. And so they tested 1 week with this sign on the beer saying best selling versus 1 week where the sign was removed. And simply informing that this beer is popular made that beer increase its sales by 2.5 times. And what was so interesting about this is it wasn't like the sales of the rest of the beers went down. They stayed the same, except the sales for the London Pride beer went up as well. Simply saying that people bought this beer made people more likely to go and buy that beer. That's the power of social proof. We follow the actions of others. There's all sorts of wonderful ways you can apply this. This is one of the most basic ones. But understanding that we follow the actions of others can help dictate how you organize and change your marketing. Let's go into another one, endowment effect. Now, the endowment effect means that we basically start to feel ownership over things that we've begun. That if we have started a task, we are far more likely to finish it. So an example of this is if it's late on a Friday and there's an email you really don't want to send, the best thing you can do is start sending that email. Because once you've started that task, it's really difficult not to finish it. You feel this ownership over it, and that's how the endowment effect kicks in. I won't spend too long explaining the theory because I've got a wonderful example I want to share with you. And it's a brilliant example from 2006 by Nunez and Drez. And what they did with this example was they gave participants 2 loyalty cards to a coffee shop. And the loyalty cards were given to 2 different sets of participants. They didn't cross over. One of the loyalty cards asked the participants to collect 7 stamps, so to go and buy 7 coffees in order to get a free coffee. The other card asked the participants to buy 9 coffees and get 9 stamps in order to get a free coffee. But when the barista handed over the 9 stamp variant, they stamped in the first 2 stamps for free. Now, what's interesting here is an economist might look at this and say, these 2 cards are identical. They both require the buyer, the consumer in this case, to go and buy 7 coffees in order to get a free coffee. But the behavioral scientists listening will know that that's not the case. The way our mind perceives these 2 cards is different. One is a process that has already begun, is a task that we're already partway to completing. The endowment effect kicks in and it makes us more likely to complete that second loyalty card. So when the barista stamps in the first 2 loyalty cards, you actually get an 82% higher completion rate. So an incredible finding, which you can already see how this can be applied to multiple different areas. If you're gamifying your onboarding strategy, you should tell people how far they are in the process. If you're giving out a loyalty card, you should stamp the first few stamps in, not just literally as a coffee shop, but metaphorically as well for any loyalty program you're running. By kicking off the process, it will make people more likely to finish it. Let's go into another one, which I'm sure many of you will know. This is loss aversion. Loss aversion is the idea that losses feel twice as painful as equivalent gains. So the best example I could give of this is if you were offered $20, that would feel pretty good. And you could take that $20 and you'd feel pretty good about it. But if I stole $20 off you, you would feel bad. In fact, so bad, you'd feel twice as bad as if you had just been given $20 in the first place. Losses feel really bad. This is another evolutionary bias. We don't want to lose the things we have. We want to hoard. This is a natural bias that all of us have. And very smart marketers can start to apply this to their messaging to really improve the potency of the messaging. And I've seen this applied in many areas, but one of the very best ways is in Amazon Prime. And what Amazon Prime will tell you if you try and cancel your subscription to Amazon Prime, like I did recently. So this is an example of what I think most companies might say if you went to cancel their subscription service. So this is not what Amazon say, but this is what I expect most companies might say if they didn't understand the loss aversion bias. They might say something like, Amazon Prime offers free delivery and exclusive benefits. Are you sure you want to cancel? Classic stuff, highlighting the positives, just like I was saying at the start, highlighting all the good things that you'll get and that you do get if you continue your sort of Amazon Prime subscription. But here is what Amazon Prime actually say. They say, Phil, we've saved you £313 since you became a member in August 2019. You sure you want to confirm your cancellation? They're really highlighting what I would lose if I was to quit. They're highlighting the actual financial value that I would miss out on. And what happens here is that loss aversion kicks in and it makes people far less likely to churn. So according to Richard Chataway in his book, Behavioral Business, this one message, when tested against a control, led to a 42% reduction in churn. Simply telling people what they're going to miss, what they're going to lose out on, not just the positives that they already have access to, makes people more likely to take action and change decision-making processes. Okay, you're doing very well. We've done loss aversion, we've done scarcity. Let's get on to another one that I love. It is anchoring. Now, this is the idea that we are anchored to the initial piece of information we see. This is especially true when information is scarce. So if you go to a restaurant later on tonight and you're looking at the wine menu, if you see that the first wine on the menu costs $15 for the bottle, you probably would think that's quite cheap because it is quite cheap. But if you saw that the wine was $15 for a bottle, and then you saw one further down that was $30, you'd think, oof, that $30 one, it's a little bit expensive. It's on the expensive side. I'll opt for something cheaper, maybe around the 20 or 25 range. Whereas if you went into another restaurant and you saw the first line on the list cost $50, and then you saw one for $30 later on, you think, gee, $30, that's an amazing deal. And that's basic anchoring in process there. We compare the things we're looking at based on the initial piece of information we see. And this affects us throughout our life. We are constantly viewing things through the realm of anchors. In fact, we view things to the realm of anchors to a sort of ridiculous degree. I'm sure many of you have heard of anchoring before, but you might not have heard of this example. And it's really quite eye-opening. So this is an example of Snickers. They were selling their new ice creams, and they ran a bit of a test on the messaging that they were using within their sort of supermarket sort of promotional messages. So if you're in a supermarket, you're about a freezer, you'll see a little promotional message for Snickers ice cream. And the first message that they tried, this is in Phil Barden's brilliant book, Decoded. The first message that they tried was simple, sort of classic marketing, buy Snickers for your freezers, highlight positives, all that stuff. And in that scenario, people bought, on average, 1.4 bars. And then they went for a ridiculous anchor, something that shouldn't have worked, something that was just completely pushing sort of anchoring to its limits. And they simply said, buy 18 Snickers for your freezer. It's ridiculous, right? Nobody was buying 18. Nobody was buying even close to that. Snickers didn't want you to buy 18. They just wanted to test if this ridiculous anchor would have any effect on behavior. And incredibly, it does. On average, customers went and bought 2.6 bars when they were seeing this message. It's a really simple application of anchoring. We've seen Dan Ariely apply the exact same biases in his studies that are cited in Predictably Irrational. On those studies, he got his students in his class to look at their social security number. And he told them to look at the last 2 digits of that number and see, is it a high number? So is it above 50 or is it a low number? Is it below 50? He split the students by whether they had a high number or a low number. Remember, your social security card number is completely random. It has no effect on your tax bracket or anything like that. And he then got these 2 groups, high numbers and low numbers, to bid on certain items that he brought into the class. CD-ROM, bottle of wine, a keyboard. And he found, especially when he primed them to say, please do think about whether you're a high or low social security number, he found that the people who were sitting in the high group, well, they bid 3 times more than those in the low group. Just that simple anchor dramatically changed behavior. And Dan Ariely sort of proved that in his classroom, but Snickers have proved that in a real world scenario as well. Anchoring is very important, but probably not as important as scarcity. Scarcity, for every marketer listening, is probably the creme de la creme of marketing nudges. We all love to use a little bit of scarcity because we've all seen how powerful it is at changing behavior. Scarcity, of course, as you know, is the idea that a scarce resource is more valuable than a highly available resource. One of the most hilarious examples of this comes from the Kingdom of Prussia almost 200 years ago. So Prussia was fighting a war against Germany in the 1800s, and they had a real problem. The problem was they couldn't get people to enough food, essentially. They were running out of food. The country was going into a severe famine, and the king of Prussia needed to find a solution. The solution that he found was the humble potato from South America. So the potato was this fantastic product that could be harvested in all sorts of climates. It would be able to be harvested in Prussia during winter. And so he brought over the potato and started to encourage people to use the potato. Problem was, nobody would eat the potato. There was a saying in Prussian, which was something that is foreign to me, even my dog won't eat, or something along those lines. I don't have the notes up right now, but nobody would touch the potato, which is funny, right? Like Prussia is, it's places like Poland, Belarus, Lithuania. These are kingdoms, these are areas now which are very, very, people that very, very enjoy their potatoes. So what did the king of Prussia do to change behavior? He leveraged scarcity. He made the potato not readily available, but extremely hard to get access to. He only cultivated it in the gardens around his palace. He asked his guards to severely man these gardens and make sure that people couldn't get through, and didn't make it available to the people of Prussia. But he understood psychology, and he knew that because he was making this a scarce resource, people would want it more. So he told the guards to take predictable breaks and to, sort of shut their eyes a bit if they saw someone stealing it. And slowly, over the course of months, more and more people stole the potato, and more people wanted to eat it, not because they loved the taste of potato, but because they wanted to eat something that was a scarce resource and only available to the king. And today, I think Belarus, don't quote me on this, I will check at the end, but Belarus, which is one of the countries within Prussia, is now the biggest consumer of potatoes worldwide, beating even South America, where the humble potato is from. And that's how scarcity can affect action. But that's an example from 200 years ago. Let's go to an example of a marketing sort of campaign today. And this is probably one of my favorite examples that I'll share today. And it's from KFC Australia. And again, it's another example from the book Behavior Business by Richard Chataway. Now, KFC spend $3 billion a year on marketing. They have access to some of the world's best copywriters, the world's best ad men and women, who are able to write these fantastic slogans that really get people to take action and buy. So they decided, why don't we put our heads together and run a really good test? We've got a product, which was their fries, and we've got an offer, chips for $1. So KFC Australia was selling chips for $1, and they wanted to find the very best message that they could use to get people to buy chips for $1. And so they asked their ad men and women to come up with as many slogans as they could think of. And these folks, they got creative. They had all sorts of slogans, from the Colonel has never been so generous to from, Aussie's favorite chips just for $1, loved from Perth to Brisbane, they're just $1. Way more than that. They came up with 90 different slogans to test which one would be the most effective. And what they did is they ran a huge Facebook campaign where they had all of these 90 different slogans and then measured how many people actually clicked on the different ones and actually went through and ordered the delivery to buy chips for $1. Now, I think the people at KFC expected some beautifully written, smart, witty, creative copywriting to come out and be successful. But for behavioral scientists listening, perhaps you'll predict that this wasn't the case. Actually, what got people to buy was simple scarcity. The winner of this test read, chips for $1, limited to 4 per customer. Now, there was actually no official limit. They just came up with this for the slogan, but they found that it was easily the most successful way to get people to buy. And so they enforced a limit on the chips just to change perception. Because when you make something a scarce resource, just like those potatoes that I mentioned earlier, people are far more likely to take action. Now, today, I really want to do a deep dive into perhaps a nudge, a bias that you haven't heard of. It's called the pratfall effect. And the reason I'm so interested in the pratfall effect is it goes against conventional marketing. So unlike some of the others that we've talked about, they can sort of fit within your sort of typical marketing strategy. But the pratfall effect really echoes what I said at the start of the show, which is that marketers in general are drawn towards positivity, and that might be a bit irrational, that highlighting negatives can sometimes be a benefit. Because the pratfall effect showcases that we are drawn towards things that aren't perfect. It's why the Shit London Guinness Instagram account has so many followers, and it's why McDonald's could benefit from renaming their slogan. This isn't just an opinion, there is science to back it up. The pratfall effect was discovered back in 1966 by a Harvard psychologist named Elliot Aronson. Now, in Elliot's study, he recorded an actor answering a series of quiz questions. Participants would watch the actor answer the questions on a recording, but they wouldn't know that it was an actor. They thought it was a real person answering quiz questions. In the first version of the experiment, the actor answered the quiz questions incredibly well, getting 92% of the questions correct. However, after answering the final question, the actor, by mistake, spilt a cup of coffee down himself and went all over his trousers, really made a bit of a prat of himself. Then, in a second recording, the actor recorded the exact same series of questions. The actor got the exact same questions right. The actor had a 92% accuracy, just like before, except in this variant, the actor did not spill the coffee. Elliot Aronson showed these two different recordings of the same actor getting 92%, one where he spills coffee, one where he doesn't, to different sets of participants, and then asked them to rate how likable the actor was. And what he found, which was irrational, was that the actor was considered more likable when he had this weakness, when he spilt coffee down himself. Aronson said the pratfall effect made the actor more appealing, increasing his approachability and making him seem more human. Now, sort of when you look at it this way, you can sort of understand this. I think naturally, as humans, we understand why we don't like people who are perfect. We actually like to see the flaws in people. And this, I think, comes to us naturally, but it can reveal itself in some really interesting different scenarios, like, for example, an interview process. So a similar study was carried out at Swansea University in Wales, and it was led by the researcher Joe Sylvester. Now, this time the researchers looked at the effect of admitting to past mistakes in an interview. So this is something most of us logically don't try and do. We don't make a big deal of our weaknesses in interviews. Just for the same reason that those marketers at the start highlight positivity, we think if we showcase negatives, we'll not get the result we want. And so in their study, they sent two identical candidates who were sort of Scrooges. They were not actual real candidates, but the interviewers didn't know that. And they sent these candidates to interview for dozens of different jobs. Now, the candidates would always share the same skills, the same experience, the same strength. The only difference, I think it was even the same person. It was the same person going for the jobs, so there was no sort of bias in terms of demographics. The only difference in how that person presented themselves is in some scenarios, they would reveal a weakness, and in some scenarios, they wouldn't reveal a weakness. And what they found, just like Aronson's original study, is when job interviewees revealed a weakness, they were considered more likable and thus were more likely to be offered a job. Essentially, highlighting your weaknesses and your flaws, or revealing one, perhaps by spilling coffee down yourself, actually increased likability. This affects products as well. It doesn't just apply to people. So consumer psychologist Adam Ferrier, brilliant consumer psychologist based out of Australia, he proved this by asking a sample of 626 people a question about cookies. The participants were shown two cookies that were identical, apart from one small difference. One had a rough edge, while the other was perfectly smooth. And the cookie with the rough edge, the imperfect cookie in this scenario, was overwhelmingly the favorite, with 66% of people preferring it. Now, you could say that's because it looks more homemade. You could say that's because it looks more genuine. Probably true. But the same principle is being showcased here. Things that aren't perfect, things that perhaps have imperfections, weaknesses, flaws, tend to be preferred. And some campaigns, some marketers, some brands actually realize this and add it to their marketing and create some really compelling marketing campaigns. So in the mid-'80s and well, right the way through to today, you've got Buckley's, a US cough medicine company that have used the slogan, "It tastes awful and it works." And this slogan must be working for them because they've kept it for the last 40 years. And I think one of the reasons why it's so successful is because it's harnessing a weakness. It tastes awful and it works. By revealing that weakness, it makes the benefit, it working, seem more believable. Buckley's aren't the only sort of oral medicine that takes this to heart. Listerine do something similar. Back in the 70s, they ran a poster that read, "I hate it, but I love it. Let me tell you, it tastes lousy, but that's why it works so good." Another great example of a marketing team taking a risk, highlighting a negative, and coming up with a campaign that actually gets remembered and actually drives people towards action. There's a modern day example of this, which I absolutely love. I love it because I feel like these ads, by the way, at the moment are few and far between. Very few companies are willing to test this stuff out, but those that do seem to get great results. This is an ad from the Snowbird Ski Resort, and it was originally only published in a magazine. That's until like a few fans saw the ad and they started sharing it on social. Another fan wrote an article about it on Medium and it took off. And according to Google, just the image of this ad has been shared over 5,000 times online. It is extremely viral. Why has this marketing campaign hit the gold mine and really captured people's attention? Well, it's because it highlights negativity. It shows a review for this Snowbird resort, which you wouldn't usually see in an advertisement. It says 1 star, too advanced. I've heard Snowbird is a tough mountain, but this is ridiculous. It feels like every trail was too steep or littered with tree wells. How is anybody supposed to ride it? It's brilliant, right? Highlighting this negativity captures our attention, increases our memorability, and actually makes people more favorable to try out our sort of service or campaign. And it plays on the pratfall effect, this idea that we like imperfection. And I think it works because we're so bored of seeing positivity in marketing, and a bit of negativity actually catches our eye. Now, I'm a marketer and I want to convince people to do stuff. I want to convince people to listen to my podcast. So I thought I'd test this out. I thought I'd actually see if the pratfall effect could make my marketing more effective. And so I decided to create 2 Reddit ads. These Reddit ads would try and prove that the pratfall effect isn't just a gimmick, it's a real bias that's so effective that you can create whole marketing campaigns around it. These ads would promote my podcast, Nudge, but the ads would be crucially different to test the effectiveness of the pratfall effect. So let's walk through the 2 ads I created. The first is that traditional positivity-based marketing that I spoke about at the start. It's highlighting all the positives about my podcast. It said, 5 reasons why you should listen to Nudge. You'll learn the science behind great marketing. Guests include Rory Sutherland, Nir Eel, and Richard Shotton. At the time, it had 100,000 downloads and a bunch of 5-star reviews. Episodes are 20 minutes long with no fluff, no ads. You learn marketing science you can replicate. Not too different from Ryan's suggestion right at the start of this show, highlighting the positives. Now, I'll admit this is not the world's most creative copy. It's not as good as I'm sure a lot of you have created, but it's what the textbooks tell us to do, talk about product benefits. But I decided, let's come up with something different. Let's create a pratfall version. And here's the variant I created. It is titled 5 Reasons Why You Shouldn't Listen to Nudge. You'll realize how useless your marketing degree was. Episodes are packed with so many examples, you might get a headache. You'll piss off your colleagues with your new great ideas. It's only 20 minutes long, which isn't ideal for long car journeys, and you'll learn marketing science, not LinkedIn guru wisdom. Now, this is a little tongue-in-cheek. I do believe that these, they're not purely negatives. They're sort of weaknesses that reveal positives, which is exactly what you want to go for with the pratfall effect. But still, I did not think this would work. I thought this was way too literal. I was literally telling people not to listen to my show and giving them good reasons why. And the people who were seeing this ads were not fans. They were not people who would be inclined to listen to my show anyway. They were random people on Reddit. So I really believed that this ad wouldn't work. I was pretty sure that the pratfall effect wouldn't work in this scenario. I spent around $110 in total. Over 300,000 people saw the ads. And, well, you've probably seen it coming, but I was very surprised by the results. The pratfall effect version dramatically outperformed the control. The click-through rate on the control was 0.09%. For the pratfall effect, it was 0.47%. That's 4 times more effective by telling people not to listen to the show. Over 500 new listeners came to the show from that one ad. And to this day, it's one of my most effective Reddit ads. And I've run it multiple times since launching it the first time. And yet, this is something that I'd almost never be able to do within the company I work within Buffer. It's really hard to convince your boss to do an ad which says why you shouldn't use this product. And I think this is why you see so few people using it. But it pays to be different. It pays to apply science to marketing, and it pays to apply tests that no one else would dare. And before I finish up, I'm going to leave you with one more example of somebody who leaned into their weakness and applied their weakness and used it as their main strategy and got a really good result off the back of it. It's not a marketing example, but it's a fascinating example that I think will stick in the mind and help you remember this nudge. So this here is Stephen Bradbury. He was a speed skater who represented Australia at the 2002 Winter Olympics. Now, the Winter Olympics are not a big deal in Australia, as you can imagine. It's quite hot there. So it's quite a surprise when Stephen made the final of the speed skating in the Winter Olympics. Steve was against the fastest skaters on the planet. He had to race them over 1,000 meters around an ice rink. He was easily the slowest person racing, and he was also the oldest person racing, and he really stood no chance of winning. So he decided to embrace his flaw. He built his strategy around the pratfall effect, using his weakness to his advantage. Bradbury knew that every other racer in the race was desperate to win. For them, only gold would do. They wouldn't want silver, they wouldn't want bronze. Now, he could have tried to compete with them outright, but that would have only meant one of two things. He would have either tired himself out by the halfway line and sort of fallen too far behind if he had really tried to compete heavily with them, or far more likely, he would have fallen and not finished, something that was very common in speed skating. So he tried a different strategy. He simply put himself behind the main racers in their slipstream and just tried to keep up, because when you're in the slipstream, you can sort of keep pace with the skaters, even though you're not as physically strong as them. And this is what he did for the entire race. It's a really interesting race to watch. I'd actually advise you to go and take a look at it afterwards, because you'll see the four main racers absolutely going for it. And then Stephen behind the pack, just sort of ambling along, but just about keeping up, embracing his weakness, not trying to go beyond and really try and beat them because he knew he couldn't, just sticking behind and hoping for something to happen. But eventually it became obvious he was finished last. He was back of the pack. There was only one lap to go. All four racers were in front of him. But then 10 meters before the finish line, going around the final corner, the Russian fell. And the Russian took the American with him. And the Canadian was taken out by the American. And then the Chineseman was taken out too. And meters from the finish line, all four other skaters were lying on the ice. And Bradbury just went past them, crossed the finish line before they could get up. And just like that, Stephen Bradbury became the first athlete from the entire southern half of the planet, so the entire southern hemisphere, to win a gold at the Winter Olympics. Not by fighting to compete, not by focusing on positives, but by embracing his flaw and using his weakness to his strength. It's a wonderful example, and you're probably thinking it's great for the Olympian, but where's the proof? Where does it work for large brands? I'll leave you with one last brand example as well, and it's one you probably can already think of. It's Marmite. If you're not in the UK, you might not know about Marmite. It is a yeast extract spread, but that is not what makes Marmite interesting. What makes it interesting is how, just like Stephen Bradbury, it constantly highlights its flaws. Their slogan is, you will either love it or you'll hate it. And the fact that they're literally highlighting with this fact that lots of people do not like this product. It goes against all sorts of marketing best wisdom, and yet it consistently gets results. In 2014, Unilever produced an additional 8-week campaign, which slightly tweaked Marmite's love it or hate it slogan. And in this version, Marmite was pictured as being left at the back of the cupboard, unused and unopened for months. The campaign was called End Marmite Neglect, and it was highlighting the fact that consumers barely use Marmite. So it was showcasing a weakness here, but what happens? Sales soared. The brand saw a 14% increase on year-on-year sales. It generated £37 million in additional revenue, and it helped Marmite bag the 2014 Brand of the Year title at the Marketing Week's Engage Awards. That is the power of applying science to marketing. That is the power of avoiding this conventional wisdom and only focusing on positives and actually starting to apply marketing science. We've seen how consumer science and behavioral science can be used to improve your marketing in all sorts of ways, from scarcity to social proof to loss aversion to the endowment effect. But for me, the pratfall effect is one of my favorites because it really goes against that conventional wisdom and helps lots of different people get results, from Marmite's multinational campaign to my podcast and my Reddit ads to an Australian speed skater who ends up winning gold. That's the power of applying behavioral science to your work. And that is all I'm going to talk to you about today. Hopefully we've got time for a bit of questions and a bit of Q&A. But just before I finish up, if you do want to learn more, if you were interested in this content, then please do go and check out Nudge. It is, as I mentioned at the top of the show, one of the world's most successful sort of behavioral science podcasts, got lots of listeners, hopefully a lot like yourself, publish an episode every week. So if you're interested in learning more, go and give Nudge a search wherever you get your podcasts.
Phill, this is the only presentation where I feel obliged to be like, well, hopefully that was manageable for 45 minutes and it didn't bore you too much. But seriously, thank you for that wonderful tour of some of these high-level psychologies that we talk about so often in the field. The pratfall stuff was quite fun. We have an incredible battery of questions. So to everybody who's chatting me up on the chat, that was redundant, I'm going to try my best and I'll try to ask questions for people that can't ask their questions because they're like on the job and stuff. But let's start with Tara Lynn. Do you want to bat lead off? Come off the mic, or were you? No.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
I can jump in. Thanks, Phill, for the great overview. Really enjoyed all the examples you ran through. I was just wondering, I work in the B2B space, and I was just wondering how you've maybe seen other examples where behavioral approaches sometimes differ between B2C versus B2B products. That's basically my question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I do get asked it a lot. I think the first thing to consider is, behavioral science works because you're understanding how humans make decisions. And obviously a lot of the examples are done with consumers because there's just far more of them and it's easier to sort of run those sort of field tests. But people in B2B businesses are people as well, and they have the exact same biases. I won't go into a whole wealth of examples, but there are plenty of examples with B2B companies. I've worked at B2B companies in the past where I've applied them. The only thing I would say is there are probably some biases that are more prevalent in the B2B space than there are in the B2C space. So if you look at Cialdini's 7 sort of fields of influences, one of his field or one of the sort of areas that he talks about is reciprocity. That's the idea that if you sort of do a favor for someone, they are more than likely to return it. This is a wonderful story about the world's most successful car salesman of all time, Joe Girard. All he did was send a postcard to his customers every month saying, "I like you." So childish, so like stupid, but it made him sell 13,000 cars in 1 year or something ridiculous, or 13,000 cars in his history. And you can totally see how like reciprocity really works within the B2B space. If you're in sales, if you're in direct sort of one-to-one sort of sales on a B2B level, or sort of these high cost enterprise sales, reciprocity is a really important one. So behavioral science definitely applies. Just think carefully about which biases you want to use. And I would say test out the ones because some might work better for B2B, like reciprocity, than maybe some of the more general ones like social proof.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Brangendra, am I saying your name right? Please forgive me if I did not.
Yes, you are.
Okay. Yeah. So please bring your question. Where are you, by the way? It's always curious to hear where people are.
I'm from India right now. It's almost like 11 p.m., 11:30 p.m. here. Anyways, it's a great discussion you're doing, and it's definitely keeping me awake for sure for some time. So my question is, we saw the social proof as a very significant bias, especially when it comes to things like fake news and stuff like that, and things going viral all the time. So how might we overcome social proof?
Yeah, great question. So one thing I want to share right at the top of that is that social proof is more effective in sort of countries that are more that are less individualist, sort of focused on the individual. So social proof isn't as effective every country, and this is the case with most biases. There are studies that show that social proof is actually more effective in less individualistic societies, like a lot of South Asian societies in particular. Social proof is actually more effective than it is in, say, like a society like the UK or especially the US, where people are more individualistic. But social proof has an incredible sort of effect in the US, and it's even more applicable in sort of less individualistic societies as well. So one thing to check there is that social proof does change based on where you are in the world. In terms of how we as individuals might overcome it, I mean, I think the number one thing is to understand this bias. It's really important for us to understand how we are influenced and to name it, to give it a name like social proof, and have that in our vocabulary and note when we see it. This is more of like an individual thing that I think all of us can do. You know, if you're walking through a holiday resort and you're on holiday and you're trying to decide where to go for your meal that evening, if you find yourself drawn towards the restaurant that has the most people outside or the most people queuing up, you're being affected by social proof. Now, that's not always a bad thing. Like, it's good that we have that bias. It's good that we follow the actions of others. As I said, it's helped us evolve. But yeah, there are examples where you might want to, you know, not follow the crowd, because I think that might be bad, especially with examples of fake news and stuff like that. The best advice I can give to individuals is to learn about this stuff and to understand it and to name it and to see when you're being affected by it, because it's a nudge that really does affect us in all walks of life. Yeah, so understanding it, naming it, and remembering it is probably the best advice I can give. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, Phil, what you didn't know is Brent Gendrick gave you the best testimonial ever. So you ready? Phill Agnew definitely keeps me awake. That's a t-shirt if I ever heard one. So Tiziana, she wanted to know, she said, and I've not followed this in the UK, but she said Amazon's use of loss aversion has been considered a deceptive pattern and you're punished for it. Do you know anything of this status with all the regulation in the EU?
I don't know if that's referring specifically to the messaging I shared or something else. That messaging was from Richard Chataway's book, Behavioral Business, which was published in 2020. So things definitely has changed from there. I know for a fact that, you know, Amazon has a lot of shady sort of, I mean, a lot. We could spend a whole 60 minutes talking about it. I mean, UK especially, they definitely don't pay not even enough tax or any tax. So they do a lot of shady things. And I think their use of loss aversion, you know, isn't great. Like, they are really getting people hooked on this product. The issue is, you know, I think it's not just Amazon that are doing it. It's a lot of people from Netflix to Spotify to other subscription services. There really isn't very good regulation to stop this stuff at the moment. And I think that's because, you know, behavioral science is still a fairly new and up and coming field. For those of you listening who are applying this stuff yourself, some of you might work at Amazon. There's good advice I would give you, which comes from Nir Eill's book, Hooked. So he really talks about the ethics behind this. I would read that book if you're really interested in this. And he basically says, is this something that you think is providing benefit to the consumer? So is it providing some sort of value? Probably in that Amazon case, we'd probably say no. They'd probably just want to quit and not be stopped. And then ask yourself, if I was in the consumer's shoes, would I want this to happen to me? And if the answer to both those questions is no, it's not providing value and I wouldn't want this to happen to me, then you're probably doing something unethical and you shouldn't be doing it. And I would agree. I think in the Amazon example, it's an example that I wouldn't want that happening to me, and I don't think it's providing a huge lot of value. I wouldn't actually say Amazon are the worst offenders here. I think if you look at, this is a UK one because we've got online gambling firms here. And some of the nudges they use to bias people are incredibly manipulative. One example I'll give you is they allow you to set a cap on the amount that you gamble. This was introduced by UK law. You had to have the ability to set a cap on how much you could gamble, so people could gamble freely and know they're not going to go bankrupt. And gambling firms said, okay, yeah, cool, we'll set a cap. And they set the cap at, I think it was something like £500 million. So more than like most gambling companies in total make in revenue a year. And actually that made it much worse because it acted as an anchor that encouraged people to spend more. So there's all sorts of examples of companies using this in wrong ways. If you want to understand the ethics behind how to use it, definitely go and read Neriel's book, Hooked, or I've done an episode with him as well, so you can go back and find that if you're keen on learning more.
But Phil, very quickly interlude here. In the World Cup, if you had to bet on someone, you would bet on
In the World Cup, who would I bet on? Or
Yeah.
not America? Sorry, folks.
Oh,
I think
brutal.
I don't know. I think England's got good chances.
Okay,
we've
yeah,
got
I
good
think
chances.
that's optimism bias, but this way to go. I like it. Chloe, you had a question. Oh, Chloe, you're muted. All right.
No, sorry.
Bring it. Sorry.
Sometimes I struggle. Hey, thanks so much. This was a really interesting presentation. I say stalling as I try to find the exact wording of my question. Yes. So I was curious about the pratfall effect and how it breaks down across gender and race and across power dynamics.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not sure I can think of any study that broke down the pratfall effect based on race or gender, but I would imagine, just because of other studies that I've seen on that exact topic, that it has a big effect. There's a really interesting company in the UK called Applied, and they're a company that helps other companies conduct interviews in a non-biased way. And they've basically done a load of research which reveals what we all know, which is that everybody has natural, or well, not natural, but bad discriminations towards people of color, people of their opposite gender, disabilities, different sexualities, and it's really hard for people to overcome these biases, even if they're aware of them. And Applied, this company, have created basically a way to go through the whole interview process without seeing those differences and without being influenced by those biases. So, for example, CVs that are analyzed so they're completely blind, running interviews where you're having a live conversation with someone, but you're not being influenced by essentially their demographic. And they've shown that this dramatically changes who gets actual jobs, so it suggests that there's a bias there. There's another wonderful, well, not wonderful, but eye-opening example of this, which is from recruitment to orchestras. I forget which orchestra it was. You probably heard the example, but they implemented blind auditions, and suddenly the number of females in the orchestra doubled. And I think it shows that, a good approach to have when you're thinking about biases and discrimination is that 100% all of us have some form of discrimination and bias, and we're not going to overcome it until we actually appreciate that those biases are there, just like all the other biases I talked through today. And then actually leaning into these tools, these solutions, these frameworks that can help us overcome it, whether that's blind interview processes or, tools like Applied, that could really help us overcome those biases, because I'm sure they're there, just like, and I'm sure they're, visible in the pratfall effect too. So yeah, it's really worth us sort of being aware of that.
Thank you so much, Phil. Can we try and squeeze one last question? And Sharon, did you want to piggyback off of that?
Yes, just wanted to say, well, I think you've captured it, but my experience has been that if you're higher in the power structure, revealing vulnerabilities and weaknesses pays off. If you're lower in the power structure, revealing those vulnerabilities confirms people's biases and suspicions. On the product front, I had worked in food and once launched a protein shake, and my experience there was that if it tasted odd, it gave you sensory feedback that it was working. So I would love to see like a greater parameters put around the pratfall effect, because I'm not sure, I'm fascinated by it and I want to apply it, but I want to understand more about the conditions under which you should apply it.
Yeah, I want to add just to the start of that question, which was brilliant, the idea that, if you're higher up in the hierarchy, you'll benefit. That's what the research suggests as well. So remember, the actor who was answering those questions got 92% of their questions right. So they were showing real competence, real intelligence. They really looked like they knew their stuff. In that scenario, when he spilt coffee down himself, he was liked more. There was another scenario, which I didn't speak about, where the actor got, I think, only 50% of questions right. and then he spilled coffee down himself. And in that scenario, when the actor was shown to not be competent and to actually get loads of questions wrong and spill coffee down themselves, they were liked even less. So revealing a weakness when you don't have another strength to back it up doesn't help with your likability at all. In fact, it hinders it. So great example. And then, the example of food products, I think that, I don't look any further than Red Bull. When that was introduced to the market, all of the market research suggested that people did not like the flavor of this product. But the fact that it tasted bad made people think that it was more effective and actually helped increase sales. And we won't get into it now, but there's some fascinating studies about how Red Bull affects your psychology in terms of changing your behavior. And it's like that because it's so potent and it tastes so strong. So yeah, great point, Sharon.
I mean, as everybody, it's like everybody, anytime we do a webinar, it's like at 5 minutes before the end, everybody snorts their Red Bull and then all these questions come out. You can't snort the Red Bull at the end. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Again, please check out Phil's podcast. That's in the chat. It's spectacular. Please sign up for our newsletter, also in the chat. And because there were so many questions that bubbled up at the end, just remember, for those of you that are Rational Labs members or taking our boot camps, you can always use the Ask a Behavioral Scientist channel in Slack. And we're doing video responses to those weekly. So if you have a pressing question, it won't be Phill and his beautiful, elegant voice, but it may be someone with an equally sharp mind. So please feel free to post there. Thank you, Phill, again, for all your time, your wisdom, your generosity. And we are going to stop recording so we can all say funny things or have pratfalls of our own. If I can find the button.